Hello, and welcome to my podcast, Good Grief. My name is Dr. Christine Malone, and in this podcast, we talk about trauma, tragedy, and survival. In each episode, I will interview someone that has gone through grief in some way, and we will discuss the impact it has had on their life. By sharing these stories, we hope that others won't feel alone should they be going through similar situations. Enjoy. Okay, listeners, thank you so much for joining me for this podcast. My guest today is going to tell us about the experiences he's had with losing some friends in combat while in the military. So, guest, if you would like to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what you do.
Hi, Christine. Yeah, thank you. My name is Simon Maryan. I am clearly a Brit, and I served in the Royal Marines in the UK military for about 14 years, and then went on to specialise in human intelligence work after that. And along the way, I trained as a psychologist, which seems like an odd choice to a lot of people, but yeah, that's a winding path, as
Yes.
most people's lives are.
Yes. Well, that's very true. I certainly hear a lot of stories about that. So, tell us a bit about some of your experiences when you were in the military, and some of the losses that you incurred while you were serving, and then even once you were out, some of the things that happened with the people that you knew.
Yeah, it's such a weird thing, having kind of obviously reflected back an awful lot as you do. Losing friends in combat, you get killed next to you, um, is difficult in its own right. And then when you're somewhere else and you hear of friends being killed and you weren't there, brings a whole different kind of feeling and emotional melting pot, really. I think although the same things happened, it feels very different when you're not there as to when you are there. And that was quite a hard thing to process,
Yes.
um, not
Yeah.
being there.
Yeah. I totally understand that. Um, so when you were there, when in the military itself, because I know you mentioned things about losing people to suicide, was that a common thing, or was that just like very much of a surprise when it would happen, or how did that go?
Yeah, generally it was always a surprise. Never thought that the people, my friends friends and people I work with, so not necessarily in the same social circle, but people I knew. Um, so still kind of colleagues, I guess, would be one way of describing some people. But yeah, it's such a it was really hard to understand at first when somebody you'd spoken to the day before, and you're going to work the next day, and they'd killed themselves the evening that you spoke to them the day
Yeah.
before. So it's no clue, because I learned a long time ago that human beings, we can mask
Yes.
a
Yes.
huge amount of internal pain and keep it in and not show anything outwardly. Little signs here and there, but we become very good at masking everything.
Yeah, I know in my experience, and I have experienced suicide of people that I care about. It seems like you get fooled, especially in that end run, because they're feeling better because they know they have a plan. And
Yes.
because of that, they come across as, everything is okay. And uh, like I said, I always think to myself, how did I get fooled into not seeing that? But then when I think back on that, I think, okay, I guess I have to look for the signs to when someone who's pretty depressed suddenly is not depressed, that might be a sign that they've got an end in sight, which is sad, for sure. But yeah, I have had the same thing. I had a friend that was going through a divorce, and he called me one night and we were talking, and it was New Year's Eve, and I was on my way to a family party. So I kind of brushed him off, and he ended his life that night. And I remember thinking, wow, if I just would have talked to him longer and so on. But
Yeah.
that whole, thinking about it after the fact, what could you do? There's really not an answer to that.
Not really. No, because it might have made no difference whatsoever.
Yeah. And I know here in the US, we do have issues with our veterans ending their own lives and so on. And I know it's not an uncommon issue probably around the world. Based by, I would imagine, I mean, based on what you see when you're in combat, kind of impacts, obviously, if it's traumatic and so on, and then trying to reintegrate back into society, certainly hard to do. So hard to do. You're never going to be the same, I would think, after some of the things that you see.
No, absolutely not. No, the things that you have to experience change you forever.
Yeah.
Um, Not necessarily in a bad way. Sometimes yes, but it's life altering experiences.
Yes. Yes, it is. And for those of us left behind in many cases as well.
Oh,
So,
hugely. Yes.
and you
Yeah,
being,
because then you know, wives and husbands and
oh,
boyfriends and girlfriends have to put up with people that like myself as I used to be that appear to be an absolute raving lunatic. But while
yeah.
you're trying to adjust and process what you've gone through and adjusting to being in a civilian environment, getting back into the real world, as I often describe it.
Yeah, yeah. I can't imagine. Never served in the military. My husband has, but I have not. So that is an area that I'm not able to even relate to in that way. I know also, of course, that the stigma that comes with suicide. So those people, the families and friends and so on, and the aftermath, people don't typically respond the same way. So if I say my husband passed away and I tell you he passed away from cancer, I get a lot more of a sympathetic, empathetic response. If I say he committed suicide, it just tends to turn people away. Like, oh my gosh, that's just, they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to, they don't think, they think I don't want to talk about it, whatever. So that I think makes it even more difficult for those people that survive, the families and friends and so on. I think that makes it more difficult because it's got that stigma attached.
Yes, yeah, it's sad that it still does. I mean, it's changed. It's changed to a degree, but then and then but then again, there's other elements outside of that have an influence on how people perceive it, don't they? So
Yeah, true, true. I think it's well, again, it's one of those things that as we were talking about before we started recording, I'm quite passionate about people talking about these topics so that society in
yeah,
general can become more comfortable with them because it happens and you can't just ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist. It doesn't help. It doesn't help the people who need that outreach, whatever it might be, to keep them from doing committing suicide in the first place. So you eventually,
yeah.
oh, go ahead.
Sorry, say again.
I was going to say you eventually moved on and you started after you started. You write a book first, or were you practicing as a psychologist and then you got into the writing the book, or how did that come about?
Yeah, so I was practicing as a psychologist, private practice, doing therapy and coaching at the same time, because I was very aware from early on in my studies that the way the system works is you get your batch of sessions and you get to a conclusion, then you kind of go, hey, there you go, have a nice life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but people tend to have blips along the road afterwards, and come back. So I thought, well, why not just carry on, kind of have this blurry period where it's therapy comes to kind of mostly a conclusion and drifts and then merges into coaching, and then the therapy becomes less, the coaching gets spaced out further between sessions, so that it becomes this intermittent style of coaching with a little bit of therapy that gets less and less as you help people go through their blips that they have while they're testing out what they've learned in therapy.
Yeah. So is it like, do you tell them when you think it's time for them to make that transition, or is it just kind of a natural thing that happens, or how does that go?
It does happen naturally. And then what I tend to talk to a client in a session, say, right, I think you're ready. How do you feel about this? How ready do you feel to kind of make this more coaching
Mm.
rather than therapy? But should something come up that you weren't even aware you needed to deal with, we'll deal with it, and then we'll go back into coaching.
It seems like a great match, of one I've never thought of before, but it seems like a great match to do it that way. But
Yeah,
go ahead. So tell us
and a
about.
great business model, because if you can,
Oh, I was gonna
because you're able to help people for more of what they need.
right, right. And I mean, in my experience with therapists is it's a lot of me talking and them just kind of interjecting here and there. There really isn't anybody telling me, what I should do, or maybe a suggestion of an idea. But then my thought on coaching, I do a lot of coaching and mentoring in the professional field for healthcare leaders,
Yes.
coming in, new people from coming in from schools and so on, is more giving them suggestions and prompts. So is that kind of how it is with yours too, where the therapy part of it is more, you listening and giving, maybe interjecting things, but the coaching part is giving the actual ideas? Is that?
Yeah, yeah, and getting into the nitty gritty. So, breaking down what they've learnt, getting them to recognize what it is they've learnt themselves in therapy, and give them exercise to, tasks to go away, and then next session come back and we'll talk about this, and we can then use this. What do you feel most prioritize it in order of confidence and competence in these things, that these abilities they've learned through therapy. And then we
Yeah.
work from the bottom up. So we work on the weakest
Okay, I
to
see.
develop that.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like that pyramid foundation, like Maslow's hierarchy theory.
Yeah.
Kind of reminds me of that, the
Yes.
way you're talking. Yeah, you work on the things that are foundation and then move your way up to the things that are a little more complicated or complex. So tell me why you decided to write a book, and what's your book about?
Well, I wrote the book after I developed a process to help people, to give people self-regulation techniques to manage, to develop emotional and psychological resilience. And I developed the courses, and I was teaching that. And then I thought, actually, this is another way of getting access to people, giving people these resources, because some people don't necessarily want or need to go on a course. They're quite happy to read the book and do things that way and
Right.
learn that way. Whereas others might actually want to come on a course. And if they've got the book, then it sometimes it's a lead into the courses, because they actually want to learn more than is in the book.
Yeah. So what is the title of your book?
It's called The Immediate Care Process.
Oh, okay. Write that down.
Kind
Um,
of does what it says in the tin, really. It's kind of double-edged. The process is double-edged, because you can use it reactively for yourself when you're kind of overwhelmed, or you can use it to help somebody else who is in a moment of overwhelm.
oh, that's great.
And
So
if you use the techniques every day, practice it every day, kind of bookend your day, start the day running the exercises, finish the day with them. It's very proactive in terms of self-maintenance then.
yeah. So can you tell us a bit about that process? What is, I mean, both from what you think a person could do if they read your book and they're on their own, and or they're coming to one of your courses. So what kind of processes would they be introduced to?
So it's around 3 self-regulation techniques and I spent a long time. I spent 3 years kind of researching and testing and developing this to get it into the order that really makes more sense and works progressively and naturally.
Hmm.
So the first one is it's called a negative thought pattern interrupt. So that's, kind of, it is what it is, and it helps to interrupt that kind of negative tornado we get in our heads when
Yeah.
we get stuck in that rut of thinking negatively, and we start to, your heart rate and your breathing and your blood pressure, and you can feel your head spinning at a million miles an hour. So it
Right.
interrupts that by reducing the intensity of the emotion you're feeling in that moment that you currently have connected to those thoughts.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I think in my experience, if I'm having a negative moment, whatever that might be from,
Yeah,
the longer I stay in it, the worse it is. And so it's kind of like, it just becomes a spiral, if you will, um, of just keeps going and going and going. And it's like I can ruin an entire day if I let myself
yeah.
get there. So that seems like an incredibly important step.
And this is the interrupting that thought pattern is key to the other two working as effectively as they do.
So
Um,
when someone's in your course, they take is it like one course or a series of courses? It's a seminar. How's that structured?
the cost. So the immediate care process was what I first started with. It's grown arms and legs, as things tend to do since then. So there's a much larger course, which is I call it the advanced course, which and it so it grew from just being these self-regulation techniques to more elements to it. So the full course is for people who want to learn to become therapists, who also want coaching skills, or coaches who want to add the therapy side.
Like kind of like a train the trainer is what comes to mind when you say that.
Kind of, yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's the name has changed. It's a hell of a mouthful now, but I couldn't think. The immediate care process is those three self-regulation techniques. The rest of it that came on afterwards added so much more to it that the name didn't really fit what it was or what it is.
Right.
So, and I bizarrely, and there was no plan for this at all. The new name, to keep it short, it's the SLM process. It turned out it's my initials, but that was purely by accident. There was no thought about that at all.
What does the SLM stand for?
So the S is somato, and then it's limbic, and then metacognitive process. So it's working on the feelings, emotions, and thinking about the way we think.
Great. So of the average person, let's say they want to do your course because they just want to become, happier in life or in their situation or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Would they be taking a certain number of courses, or what would that kind of look like? Is there kind of a norm, if you will, or is it kind of pick and choose cafeteria style for courses, or how does that work?
Depends on what they're looking for. If somebody just wants the full course, the SLM process, the advanced course has everything that's in the other courses. So the other courses are basically smaller sections, progressively smaller sections of the full course.
Okay. Wow.
Because the SLM process, I have one for coaches, mentors, and leaders, and that doesn't have the therapy piece in it, but it has all the self-regulation techniques and the coaching piece elements to it, and understanding behavioral change for corporate training.
Okay.
To train their managers and leaders as coaches.
Well, okay, great.
The next one down is the immediate care process, and this is the one that I put into companies for. So rather than mental health first aid, this covers the awareness of signs and symptoms of stress and fatigue and poor mental health in someone, but then it goes on to teach techniques to actually do something about it.
Rather than just recognize it.
Yeah, recognize it and then signpost people to a system that's already knackered.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think there's a lot of so-called self-help books and programs out there that really end with the whole acknowledgement part. So I can acknowledge that I've got, these anxieties or whatever it might be, but then what's my process or what's my step to get out of it, right? I know it's kind of like, admitting it or acknowledging it or recognizing it is probably your first step. Yes, otherwise you're in denial maybe, but the whole idea of getting past that is what I think is lacking in a lot of the different books and things that I've read on that process. Is really not steps to help me get out of it, right? Where it's more like maybe how to deal with it. So maybe it's more a reactive
Yes.
thing, rather than let's be proactive now and help me so that I don't do this anymore, right?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. That's why this process is that double-edged sword. So you can use it reactively, but if you use it every day, you need to use it less frequently in the reactive way, because you're managing yourself much better.
Right. Oh, that makes perfect sense. Would you say that kind of like the process is different based on what the person is coming to you for assistance for? So let's say grieving as opposed to I'm a workaholic, or I'm stressed because I have so many children or whatever. I mean, is there just kind of a one way seems to fit all the different issues that people have?
The issue, the kind of the cause of the issue, the problematic symptoms, if you like, doesn't really matter. The end result is the same, because it's emotional overwhelm,
right.
A mind spinning too fast and can't get beyond the thoughts, and that mental fog and confusion and lack of motivation and direction, not knowing what to do first
Right,
because of the emotional overwhelm.
right, right. No,
So this is dealing with the symptoms, not the cause, essentially, because the end result of the three steps is to change your psychological and physical response to a trigger that you can't resolve.
right. Okay. That makes sense. So the first step is the negative thought pattern interruption. And what was the second one?
The next one, I call it a whole brain state, which is about slowing your brain speed down further so that you disengage from your emotional response and getting out of fight or flight
Mm,
by reducing the frequency your brain's operating in by calming it down. And when you slow your brain speed down and change its frequency to a lower frequency, you then your body will automatically follow. So it's short, creating a shortcut to activating your parasympathetic nervous system, so you rest and relax quicker, and you can do it then on demand rather than wait for it to naturally happen, which could take, anybody knows how long it could take, hours, days, weeks, depending on what's going on.
right. One thing that comes to mind for me when you describe that is the habit people have of making decisions based on, emotions and feelings and so on.
Yes.
Right, especially when it comes to, a job change or having another child or a relationship. Um,
Yeah.
Rather than and I don't mean to say those things should be made in a robot way, but a less emotional way. I know when I make decisions based on emotions, they're not always my best.
No, I concur. I've made some horrendous decisions from an emotional standpoint.
Some of mine have had very long-lasting effects, I have to admit. But nevertheless, I like to think I've learned from them, but yeah, I'm not sure that that's really the case sometimes. But and
No,
then
sometimes, yeah.
yeah, what's the third step then?
So the third step is a simple anchoring process, that anchors the output of step two. So when using these techniques, these are all self-induced, rather than being delivered by a therapist or a coach. They're taught to the person, and then they do this for themselves. So slowing the brain down to a lower frequency, and slowing the system down, the rest, the physical. So you're in a state of mental and physical relaxation and calmness. You then anchor that with a very simple action, so that anytime you need to, you can apply this simple action as a trigger, kind of as a booster shot of that calm and relaxation when you need it in times of stress.
Hmm. I have a coworker who wears a rubber band on his wrist, and when he's feeling stressed out, he snaps the rubber band. Is it kind of like that? Because
It is. The problem
okay,
with that is if the rubber band breaks, or you forget it. People have rocks and crystals and all sorts of things they stick in their pocket. But if they lose it or forget it, then what do you do?
right.
Typically, you leave the house with your head in your hands. So you can't, you're not going to lose them.
So it's more do something mental. Pick a mental thing that's your process, right?
Yes.
Your anchoring thing is more,
Yeah.
I'm
Rather
gonna
than
I'm gonna, I'm gonna take 3 deep breaths or whatever that might be.
there
So
is a kind of, it's based a shorter version of box breathing involved in step two,
okay,
uh,
okay.
and some physical, very small physical movement that can be adapted to. So these techniques can be used anywhere in any situation with any number of people, and nobody will know you're doing anything.
So is the process more like it's an individual path. They're working with you or maybe a colleague, but it's not like a group setting or we're going through as a cohort.
I actually did that on Tuesday. I was delivering training to one of Britain's most secure prisons. I was delivering training to staff there, and it was in a group setting. So everyone was, as I explained them, they gave each one a test run after I'd explained it, and then we kind of do a Q&A and debrief and discuss, and then move on to the next technique and do it like that. So you can do it in a group setting because there's no requirement for anybody to share any content.
Okay. Plus, which in that example you gave, I mean, they all have a commonality in the fact where they work, and I'm sure a very stressful environment
Yes.
where that is. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas your average person might again have something like, I'm stressed because of my work, but this person's stressed because of something else and so on. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. I'm so glad to hear about it. I'm definitely going to look up your website to hear more. So, is there anything else you'd like to share before we end today?
Well, I guess my website is a good start for anybody who is interested in finding out more. Um, and I guess my social media, I'm on what am I on? I'm on YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram, and it's all as Simon Lee Maryan.
Okay. We'll get the links to all that from you too, so we can post that with the description so people can just hyperlink and just link right on it, which is make it super easy. Don't have to remember anything from what we said, just click on the link.
Yeah, I like things like that as well. Yeah.
For me, because that's the way my brain works. Just make it as simple as fewer steps as possible. But yeah.
Yes.
Well, Simon,
Yes.
thank you so much for your time today. It's been fascinating to hear about what you do and the people that you help, and I'm so happy to have met you.
Likewise, it's been lovely to speak to you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Good Grief. To hear more about my personal story, please pick up a copy of my book, The Day I Became the Spider Killer, a memoir of trauma, tragedy, and survival, available in paperback, Kindle, and Audible via Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other online book retailers.